This conference will now be recorded.
where there's this theme of a lot of chief sales officers saying, okay, well, no, I know the talent of my sales force and the quality of my salespeople are so critically important to my success, but that's really an HR function. I'm really responsible for them once they're on board. And I just want to sort of hit the pause button that's the wrong thinking. That high performing sales forces, the talent strategy, the comprehensive talent strategy is owned by the chief revenue officer and is in partnership and supported by the HR department. So I just, again, want to call that out because, again, as I study high performing sales organizations, there's just such a difference in the quality of the sales force where the comprehensive strategy is owned by the chief revenue officer as opposed to just owned by the HR department. In our talk today, there's a few areas here that we want to cover. There are massive changes that are occurring to sales organizations in the marketplace. The expectation of the buyer and the complexity of the job of a seller is just, we thought it was accelerating, but here in the last couple of years, it's even been turned on its head. So we'll spend some time talking about the additional challenges that are entering the system for salespeople. Talk about sort of the state of sales talent. There are a few real significant problems that are really, there's some structural lag in the system that's really getting in the way of productivity and output. And there's an even bigger opportunity once you get this talent component right. And then I'll lay out, from, studying companies across the world, what does a comprehensive talent strategy look like? And it's pretty straightforward. So we'll go through and you can kind of do a check the box exercise with your own organization about what you have and what you don't have to sort of benchmark yourself. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to get some additional research that we've done, some research papers and white papers as well to follow up on the presentation today. So let's start off, change is here and it is even rapidly accelerating. The expectation and power and information that buyers have is just changed dramatically. Their expectation of the sales force is so much more significant than it used to be. In most B2B sales situations, there's a lot of times where the buyer in some cases actually has even more data than the seller. And you're seeing this shift in the dynamic of the relationship. And this is some recent data that was just done by our research organization, CSO Insights. And if you look down the left-hand side there, what we did was look at on a group of 500 global B2B buyers, when they have to solve a complex business problem and search for a business partner, who do they turn to? And the thing that's so scary is you can see the left there that salespeople have almost fallen out of the top 10 when it comes to solving a potential partner's problem. It wasn't that long ago, 5 years ago, they were in the top 4 and kind of, early 2000s, they were 1 or 2. And all of a sudden, with all of the information and data and resources that buyers have, there's been a dramatic shift in how they want to interact with salespeople. To me, this is some of the scariest data that I've ever seen if you're in the selling world. And it says a lot to our talent strategies, and we'll spend some time going into more depth on this. But this data actually even reinforces a theme that right now the global economy is kind of hitting on all cylinders. But there's a chance that on the next downturn there could be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of sales jobs wiped out of the system if there isn't a way to reverse this and sort of change the perception and impact, the perception of the buyer, and change the impact of the salesperson on that buying decision. And I think that kind of started, you start at the top here. In the past, a lot of selling was really about feature benefit, kind of a product oriented model. And then not long ago, the world's invested a ton of money in solution selling, and I'm a giant component of solution-based selling. But I think what the data is showing on that last slide is over the last decade, as sales forces around the world have invested like crazy in training on solution selling, you've actually seen the perception of the effectiveness of the buyer of the seller as rated by the buyer has dropped. So it's almost like this investment that we've made in trying to upskill the the questioning and presenting and problem solving ability of our salespeople is almost backfired. Because again, the data is showing that the buyers perceive the usefulness of the salesperson is continuing to drop. And what that really explains, when you study excellence and you study what's working and what's winning, that salespeople and really effective sales forces are making the leap from solution selling all the way to providing perspective-based selling, that they're teaching their prospect and they're teaching their clients how to run their businesses better, how to solve problems better than they've ever been able to solve them. And I think back, back when I used to, be the CEO of 2080 and all of these Salesforce effectiveness companies around the world that we ran. I think back to a comment that I'd heard Dr. Neil Rackham make, and it really stuck with me. He was the sort of the founder and father of spin selling, which is part of our solution set. And he said that the next generation of this is that the prospect should think that sales call was so good they would have paid for it. And I think that's just a great example of, are your reps good enough that when they go into a sales situation that they're actually teaching the customer how to do their job better, how to run their company better, providing perspective that they've never received before. That's really the definition of the future of selling. And the current talent systems, from a recruiting, selection, onboarding, training, reinforcing perspective, just aren't designed to move the sales force to that level of effectiveness. When you talk with the buyers, when we talk with, you take the buyer information, you take that and we present it to our clients, and we're talking with the chief sales officers or the chief human resource officers, and they're all squeezing the club really tight. They know this change is swirling about them, and it's accelerating, and it's getting tougher and tougher to hit quota. Yet when asked, okay, well, what are you doing to implement a change in your talent strategy? This year, only 20% of the companies that we studied believe that they have the talent in place to actually compete more effectively into the future, yet no one's making the changes necessary. I just find that so fascinating that everyone will recognize talent as their number one problem, but yet so few companies are actually making the investment and making it a strategic imperative to change the way in which they're thinking about how they recruit, how they hire, and how they train. And it's such a costly mistake. You study sales forces, about 10% of the people are accountable for a vast majority of the revenue. There's that 80-20 rule. As you really break it down, it gets a little bit lower than that. And then with the complexity of our sales organizations now, by the time you hire someone, the typical time to get someone up to productivity is almost a year. So all of a sudden, if your average quota around the world is about $2 million, it becomes just such a costly mistake to not get this right and to not make the investments. And then when you do talk to people about, okay, you think about that 10%, let's isolate that top 10%. What are they doing differently? Should we model them? How do you think about that? And we talk about, okay, well, what are your criteria when you go to hire? And it's so interesting that you'll hear the HR and the chief revenue officer talk about, okay, well, we're looking for certain types of degrees, certain types of subject matter expertise. Or you hear this, I need 2 to 5 years of sales experience before I'll consider anyone, or I need 2 years experience in our space. But yet then I say, okay, well, no, let's go back to that top 10%, the ones that are producing 10x of what the balance of your sales force are. Tell me about them. And they never bring back what I think of as some of these glare factors about previous experience and education and industry experience. They never talk about that. They start talking about the grit and determination and persuasiveness and responsibility and how consultative these people are and what great teachers they are and what great advisors. But it's just to me, it's just such a contradiction that as companies are building their criteria on how they hire, they talk about the stuff on the left, but yet when they explain and describe the top 10% of their sales force, it's all this stuff on the right. We've got this unique opportunity because we study, hundreds and hundreds of organizations, thousands over the last couple decades, and really isolated what's different about that top 10%. What do they bring to the table that's different than than everyone else that's selling for a living? How do we figure out what makes the most sense? And this is sort of a wheel of the factors and the attributes that tend to describe success. And this has really shifted here over the last decade. So if I'm going to, look at the wheel here, interaction, kind of 12 o'clock down to 3 o'clock, this sort of relating, this networking, networker, individualizer, advisor, team, how those are measured have shifted in the last decade. Like this used to be kind of a prospector kind of competency. And now what we're seeing shift to is it's much more about how do I figure out how to network the complexity of my prospect organizations and even network the complexity of my own organization that I'm representing, and how to craft the right sets of team members and solution sets to be able to deliver to a client expectation. From 3 o'clock down to 6 o'clock, these are really new attributes that we've discovered here that are really differentiating in the last 10 years. And it's this whole cognitive thinking ability that our very best people have, a resourcefulness. There's a much higher level of adaptability and analytical thinking in this really important concept around learning agility. That as our product life cycles continue to shrink, there's new innovation, new technologies, new solutions constantly being thrown at our sellers. And the complexity of who they're selling to is obviously changing. The ability for adults to continually learn and adapt is more important than ever. And sellers that have this natural learning agility, it's just such a differentiator. And those attributes on this thinking and cognition side of it just weren't nearly as important a decade ago, but now they're such a difference maker. And then everything here from 6 o'clock back to 12 o'clock on the wheel, this stuff has stayed fairly consistent, over the last 3 decades. There's this, you've got to execute. There's focus, persuasion, responsibility, discipline. And then there's always, that, we have to be motivated. Either, is it ambition? Is it confidence, persistence, competition? But again, 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock is sort of, that stayed consistent. 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock is really changed here over the last decade. And this is kind of a fascinating, this is a company that comes from a company that I was a co-founder of and used to run. I was the president and COO of this company, Connexa. It was a human capital research and technology company, and it was purchased by IBM. But I just want to tell a quick case study here, because here is where a talent strategy was completely operationalized. And this, as a public company, we went public in 2005, and from 2005 to 2012, we went public coming off a $40 million revenue year, and by 2012, we're up to a $400 million run rate. That's the compounded annual growth rate on that as a public company. It's a pretty phenomenal run. And I went back and, we constantly were studying our salespeople, and it was fascinating. So I isolated who were the top 10 value creators and what was their background over that 10-year run. And again, we were one of the first software as a service publicly traded companies, and that was in 2005. And so you would think that our roster of highly effective salespeople would all be people that came out of technology, that sold software, that came from big tech. And there was only 2 of the people in our top 10 that actually had technology backgrounds. Our number 1 producer was actually a manager of a big box retail store. You can see it's just fascinating that when you really know what to measure and how to measure, and then how to train to it and how to reinforce it, it can transform your organization and increase the diversity of the applicant pool and the size of the applicant pool and the people that you're currently in your marketplace out competing for the same talent. It almost makes that competition irrelevant, because you can go search in other places. And so if I go down this list, someone that was selling periodicals, calling on Walmart and giant retail and grocery store chains, competing for rack space for magazines, all of a sudden that was the number 2 producer in this high flying tech company. Dental insurance, a wine distributor. Again, no one would have ever guessed that people with these kind of backgrounds would have created tens of millions in market value with these kinds of backgrounds. But again, I just think it's such a great story that when you really understand what explains success, it can transform an organization and transform a sales force. And how you get there, this is sort of the magic. We've got, I mean, decades and decades of this research that on the left-hand side, if you look at this, this brain icon here, when we go into an organization, and again, we've done this, hundreds, if not thousands of times, we say, okay, who are the ones you want more like? What's that top 10 to 20% of your sales force like? And we study everything about them. We look at, the coaching and management they've received, their sales style, their fit, their personality and culture fit to that organization. We look at all of their previous life experience, their talents, traits, attributes, any of the training that they've received in their lifetime. We look at their, demographic profile, their professional experience, their education experience, and we put it all in the mix, and we run all of that against every single business outcome metric that the client organization is tracking, whether that's percent of quota, average margin size on a deal, percent of cross-sell, upsell, sales cycle times, actually even study funnel data, how quickly people can, what they can do with the velocity of a transaction through the entire system. And when you put all that in and you use this incredible data-driven approach to studying what's predicting all of the business outcomes that as sales leaders we're held accountable to and that we're managing to, there's some magic that emerges. And all of a sudden now you can turn hiring and onboarding and training and remuneration into a data-driven conversation. And when you can have a data-driven conversation, it allows you to transform every component of your talent strategy. And when you do that, you can wrap it all together. So once you understand the attributes, those very specific skills that differentiate that top 10 to top 20% from the balance of the population, if there's anything in the previous experience that affects it, or what's the training and development and coaching and feedback that accelerates growth, all of a sudden that gives you the roadmap to how you source, how you assess them before they join, how you onboard them, how you coach them, how you train them. It becomes a validated model, a data-driven approach to how do we transform the sales force. And this is sort of the checklist that I wanted to talk with you all about. And again, once you understand what explains success, it's just, these are the 8 programs. It's that simple. These 8, having a measurement-based approach to these 8 HR practices can dramatically transform the quality and output of your sales force. And actually our data even shows that when you have these practices in place, you'll actually see a dramatic drop in sales costs. Because if your population is, filled up with these high-flying, high-performing individuals, it's amazing how much fewer people you need to cover your territories when they all have the attributes and skills that you're looking for. But nonetheless, take a step back and again, kind of assess your organization against this. In the top left here, number 1, validated success profile. Back to that research that I was talking about. Do you have an approach that you actually know and that you can objectively measure? What are the attributes, the knowledge, skills, and behavior that tend to define outstanding performance in your sales force? Step 1. Step 2, once you have that, how many people are you assessing and looking at and considering to make one hiring decision? And that's what I'm referring to here as this comprehensive sourcing strategy. That the very best sales forces, and some people even in this tight labor market around the world find this hard to believe, but if you can select the best out of 25 people as opposed to the best out of 2 or 3, the average per person output is sometimes upwards of 30 to 50% higher on the sales forces that have the rigor and discipline of actually looking at 25 people to make one hiring decision versus those that are looking at 2 or 3 to make one hiring decision. And again, having a model of what explains success allows you to expand the population. It allows you to sort of, instead of fishing in ponds that all your competitors are fishing in, you can fish in the ocean. Third is a measurement-based approach. So once you understand all those components, that flows through the entire recruiting selection process. Next on 4 there, systematic onboarding. Once you understand person by person what their strengths are, who they are, how they learn best, how they're best motivated, you can tailor the approach person by person so that you can dramatically accelerate their time to productivity when you can individualize it. Down to the bottom left on the coaching process, again, this is step 5. This is the 5th practice that high performing sales forces execute so much better on than mediocre performing sales forces. And it is a weekly process. Each salesperson is getting anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes of one-on-one time with their sales manager, looking through what are the behaviors that drive high performance, how am I performing on them this particular quarter, what are the 2 to 3 skills that I'm focusing on, what are all the resources that my manager and the organization are giving me to continue to improve in that, what are my activities for the week, have I accomplished them, and then how am I tracking against my quota goals. So weekly feedback on behavior development, skill development, follow through on all of the activities that lead to quota attainment, and then a constant refinement of the projection for the quarter. Again, an individualized, comprehensive, one-to-one coaching process based on who the person is. That then carries over into insight-based skills development. That is at the organizational level. Again, there's a lot of well-intentioned programs that we put in place to help train and develop our people. But when you study what really differentiates and what has the highest impact on your sales reps, you can all of a sudden shrink that list and focus on the most salient, most critical issues. So again, organizations that are continually refining and sort of shrinking that list of, here are the competencies that we're working on, here are the behaviors that we're providing institutional support on, here are the points of knowledge and expertise around our product and around our industry that our reps have to develop elite competence in to be successful. Again, sort of a measurement-based approach at the institutional level to continually refining and measuring the impact of those organizational development programs. The next one here is succession planning, and so many companies get this wrong that they believe and they culturally we're taught as salespeople, okay, well I hit a wall here that for me to advance my career, I now have to move to sales management. And now after sales management, I have to get into an executive role. Well, it's this kind of up or out kind of mentality. And there are so many really effective salespeople and sales leaders that they should spend their career doing this. And companies have to rethink some of the cultural and management practices within their organization. And if we have outstanding sellers and outstanding sales leaders, let's go ahead and move their base comp up. Let's go ahead and move their title up. That if someone can produce what 10 to 12 salespeople can do, why not call that person a vice president? Allow them to kind of keep that job, but to give them the perks of bigger titles and bigger base salaries, all based on really significant output. And it's, and again, it's kind of peculiar because a lot of companies have process, procedures, and rules about titling and about base comp. But again, that's something that really effective sales organizations are doing. They're rethinking some of those silly practices and focusing more on the individual and ensuring that we're doing everything we can to keep our very best sellers emotionally and intellectually engaged and with the organization for years to come. And then this last one, this offboarding, it almost sounds counterintuitive, but we have to be deliberate about offboarding. That if we have a really strong measurement-based approach and we're really truly being true to our salespeople around that weekly coaching session and true to them about the ongoing training and development, what's really interesting is that your bottom 10 to 20% will actually self-select out, and they'll do it within the first 2 to 3 quarters of their career at an organization, because they so quickly figure out, this isn't the right place for me. This isn't the right market for me to be in. The expectations are too high. I need to get somewhere else. Whereas sometimes when we make a bad hire, we'll invest and reinvest, and this will go on for 2 or 3 years, as opposed to it only going on for 2 or 3 quarters. And again, this whole being deliberate about offboarding and using a coaching-based approach to sort of cull out those bottom performers is actually the humane thing to do. That it helps the individual go find a different home that's a better fit for who they are and what their skills are, and it allows us as sales leaders to continually upgrade the organization and the talent of the organization. So with all that, I'll pause and see if there's any questions that were coming in, Mary, or if there's anything here as we take a little bit of a break to see if anyone has any thoughts or questions for us.
We did have one question, Troy, and it was around what you were talking about, compensation. And you essentially were saying that it makes more sense to have one super high performer than a bunch of different people. And this person essentially said that HR owns kind of the compensation conversation in their organization. And what do you feel like would be best practice in terms of getting HR to understand that it's no longer 2008 and salespeople aren't just showing up at the door, but instead you have to pay them a certain amount of money and give them a certain, variable compensation plan in order to keep them. How might you start and carry on that conversation with HR to kind of wrestle compensation back into the hands of leadership?
Let's see. Well, there's a couple different scenarios there. One is just, with sort of the standard package, is the base attractive enough to pull the right kind of people in? And then more importantly, what's the upside? And what are we doing to allow for, really significant upside based on significant contribution and significant performance? So there's that, just sort of the evaluation of the current plan and package, which again is a separate conversation and should be a market-driven conversation. Then you move over to the other side that I was talking about, with companies that are rethinking this whole succession planning aspect of their talent management strategies. That when we have these super overachieving salespeople, that we need to come up with unique systems around remuneration and around titling that allow them to achieve their long-term compensation and title objectives, but yet they get to stay in the sweet spot of what they're really good at. And the only way to do that, if you don't have receptive people in the HR and comp department, is to make it a data-driven conversation. That when you can actually sit down and show, what's the cost of acquiring a customer? What's our CAC? What's our customer acquisition cost? And to then actually show what's the lifetime value of a customer, and then what are individual sales reps' impact on CAC and impact on the lifetime value of a customer, it becomes a really simple conversation. That it's not about opinion or emotion. It's about the data and the impact that really elite sellers can have on creating business value for our organization. So there's no magic answer to that, other than that it has to be data driven.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great answer. I'm sure the person will ping me and share some additional information. But let's forge on here. This is great.
Yeah, and so again, I wanted to, I don't have a lot more data prepared, but happy to spend as much time as anyone would like breaking down any of these talent practices and case studies around organizations that are getting these things operationalized, what some of their challenges were, and then what some of the outputs were once they had that figured out. If anyone has any thoughts or questions on that.
Got another question about coaching process, and that is, do you, based on organization size and complexity, do you recommend a specific coaching I'm not quite sure what this person's asking, but do you what type of coaching process, I guess is what they're asking, would you recommend? And would that change based on organization, complexity and size?
No, again, I always, I've been really, really lucky that I've had these, great jobs where I've, literally been able to study thousands of organizations and thousands of sales forces. And so it's kind of like a lab where I get a chance to see, a lot of different kinds of programs, and the outcomes or lack of outcomes from those programs, and where I've really landed on this, and it's supported by all the data. I almost think of it as almost like a 4-box kind of concept. And it really is the same, whether you're working at a startup technology company or that you're in a global 100. And every salesperson needs weekly one-to-one time for 30 to 60 minutes. It's typically done on a Monday with their sales leader about them. And it's about 4 areas, and it's behaviors. So this is one of the 4. We know these are the behaviors that explain high performance. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of each quarter, you're given 2 to 3 behaviors to focus on to continue to build and develop, or 1 or 2 behaviors are identified that are actually derailing you, and that you own it personally, and that you work through a plan on it, and that you're checking in your 30-minute or your 60-minute one-on-one coaching. You just call it out, and you're sort of cataloging and journaling during the week. Here's what I'm working on to improve this, or here's what I'm working on to make this behavior irrelevant. The second area that has to be in that weekly session is about skills, knowledge, or competency. And so again, most organizations, if you study what are all the competencies and points of knowledge, product knowledge, industry knowledge that one needs to possess to do this job at excellence, the list isn't that long. Let's say the list is 20 things. Well, you can't do 20 things in a quarter, but you can do 2 or 3. And so each quarter you're focusing on 2 to 3 of these skills, and you're working it, and you're developing it, and the company's giving you resources, you're doing some things on your own. But again, you're checking in every week and having a conversation about that skill or knowledge development with your sales leader in that session. Then it ties back into the day job, that there are activities that are expected of us as sellers every week, whether it's number of cold calls or presentations, RFPs, demos, again, whatever the definition of activity is within your sales force, you and your manager are agreeing on every week. This is the activity that I'm going to drive to continue to fill the funnel and build the funnel and get deals across the finish line. So there's just a weekly check-in on, is that work getting done? What can the organization do, or what can I do as a manager or a leader to help you be more successful in these initiatives? And then the 4th one is a quick conversation on, where do you stand on your current projection for the quarter, and how are you progressing on your additional business objectives? So again, it's 30 to 60.
Interestingly, that's kind of where most sales leaders spend their time, right there, right? Like that last piece, and very little on the other 3 that you mentioned.
Yeah, and so when we're working with sales forces and sales, it's like, no, there's this Monday meeting that's about the person. At the end, you're refining quota, refining projection, but then Tuesday through Friday, that's all you do as a sales leader, is work with reps on deals. There you're constantly working on, okay, what deals can we accelerate? What's the next best strategic step to move this through the sales cycle? So it's amazing that when you work with sales forces and you get that rhythm and discipline built in, with their sales managers, and they take care of all the rep development on Monday. It's incredible how much of their week they get back on Tuesday through Friday just to focus on getting deals won and developing business relationships, because so much of their week, typically, if you don't have this rigor and discipline, is that you're just constantly chasing your tail and getting derailed with people problems or with this issue or with that issue. But just this weekly taking perspective, taking a deep breath on where we are with every one of our reps, and each rep taking perspective on where he or she is, it just sets the week up for enormous amounts of productivity gain.
Sounds like it. A couple other questions have come in. One question is, what would you recommend for succession planning if the organization has a deliberately flat structure?
No, thanks for the question. And I think that's the type of organization that should be able to quickly adopt some of these things that, again, based on output and productivity. If, again, I'm just going to throw just sort of an example out there, that if, let's just say that there are 50 sellers in this organization. Well, if 10 of them, 20% of them are accounting for 80% of the output on a consistent year-over-year basis, there's a way at which you can start shrinking the size of that sales force, kind of doing 2 for 1, that you start taking 2 of the underperformers out, bringing in 1 more high flyer. All of a sudden, 12 to 24 months later, you've got a more streamlined sales force, and you can begin to up the titles of these people, that based on, if it used to be the average salesperson did 2 million a year and you're doing 6, well, that all of a sudden means you get a bigger title. You're a director, you're a VP, you get a seat on different management councils. There's prestige that comes with that, and there's bigger base salary that comes with that. That all of a sudden, again, a lot of your day job is continue to drive business value through acquiring new customers and growing current customers. But you're able to, again, get some of those title things that people aspire to, some input on management councils that people aspire to, some input on the product roadmap, bigger base salary. Again, there's a lot of things that people aspire to. They can still have those things and still continue to drive enormous amounts of value, as opposed to taking your very best producers and then sticking them into sales leadership roles, which they're kind of mediocre at, and then moving them into line executive jobs, where most of the time when you're talking to really good salespeople, that might be one of the best jobs in the corporate world. If you're really good at what you do, and the organization empowers you and lets you go out and get work done, that's an incredible play. That's an incredible way to make a living, to outsolve customer problems. The amount of things that you're constantly learning, the intellectual and emotional stimulation that goes along with selling and building business value, it's so much more interesting most of the time than a lot of these line executive jobs that people aspire to. But people end up leaving selling because they feel like, well, to get the bigger salary or to get the bigger title or to have input, I've got to go into these other lines, and they just become miserable. So I think organizations that get that sorted out, they really, they're really bringing a ton of value to their organization, and they're making people's lives better by rethinking this stuff. Hope that helps. Any other questions that are coming in, Mary?
No, I've got one last question here, and that is, can you elaborate more on offboarding, as organizations really don't focus on this? How is offboarding important for talent strategy, and does the current sales team receive any insights from management of the offboarding process?
Yeah, and just offboarding on its own is tough to pull off. Offboarding in conjunction with this broader talent strategy that I've laid out here, you can be much more deliberate. So if if that coaching process is taking place that I talked about, all of a sudden every week, if I'm getting feedback on the progress or the lack of progress that I'm making, and I'm having to like sit down with someone and talk about, you know, my inability to continue to develop these skills or to acquire the knowledge or analytical capability necessary to do this job at excellence, or the behaviors that I'm being pushed to do don't feel right to me. And then all of a sudden I have weekly accountability for all of these outputs and activities that I'm supposed to be doing. And that, as a human being, that doesn't feel right. If I'm not succeeding at those things, I don't even want to be there. So the most humane thing to do is to then transition the conversation to, well, look, you know, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, we've been working on this now for 2 quarters. You're struggling, I'm struggling, this doesn't feel right to you. Let's do the appropriate thing here. Why don't you take 2 weeks, figure out where it is you want to go, or what's a career path that would be good for you, and whether that's someplace else in the organization or it's time for you to move on to another company. All of a sudden it is a proactive, mutually agreed upon kind of conversation that's just so much easier. And it's also interesting that I've looked at this over time too, that where there is this weekly coaching and this objective feedback and measurement and accountability, when you do offboard someone, most of the time they're saying thank you. And you hardly ever see a lot of the employment litigation issues that you get with organizations that are offboarding or firing people that don't have these really comprehensive coaching systems or objective ways of measuring and looking at people. Again, as human beings, we all can figure out when we're good at something, and we can really quickly figure out when we're in the wrong place. And if there's open and honest dialogue about that, the world's better for everyone. So that's, there's a little bit of, philosophy behind it. But again, the more deliberate you are about the development and well-being of your people, the easier offboarding is, because sometimes the well-being of someone isn't for them to stay at your organization. It's for them to go find another place where they can be successful. Because at the end of the day, typically, outside of the people that we love and care about, what we do for a living is the next most important thing on our list. And if we're at a company or in a job that isn't a great fit for us, that has all kinds of consequences in a human being's life. It makes them a worse parent, it makes them a worse spouse. So as business leaders and as companies, we owe it to human beings to either help make them engaged and productive, or to help them find someplace else that's a better fit for them. So it's not only good business practice, it's good for people as well.
A follow-up to that question, I guess it's not really follow-up, but same person, slightly different question. Onboarding is often inconsistent and not a high focus within an organization. How important is onboarding to a new starter, and any tips on how to make the most of it?
Yeah, the very best onboarding practices, again, go well beyond all of the payroll paperwork and various government forms that you need to complete before you join an organization. It really moves into, how do we accelerate? In most organizations, if it takes 90 days to get productive, or if it takes 12 months to get fully productive as a sales rep, your first week, all of that is laid out to you. These are the attributes that we expect. Here's why you were hired, because you possess some of these. These are the ones that need to be developed. These are the points of knowledge, skill, and competence that you have to become on a 1 to 10 scale. We need to get you to an 8 on all of these for you to do this.
So you actually share the data with sellers, because I know that a lot of organizations I've worked with use a variety of different assessment tools, but they never share any of that data with the salespeople at all. So, and you're recommending that managers do share that information?
Yeah, it's because it's about them, and it's about your expectations, and it's about what you need and what they need to be successful. It's kind of like a marriage. The more open and honest you are right out of the gates, they tend to last a little longer.
So true. So true. All right. So one last question. So can you tell us about an organization that you've helped implement a talent strategy with? And how did the strategy help the organization as a whole?
Yeah, one of my that's an easy one because I was just on the phone with their CEO not too long before I jumped on this call, so it's really fresh in my mind. This is a
Mhm.
company that is in this revered spot that it has doubled revenue every year for 3 years in a row now.
Wow.
It's a young company, but it's at scale now. It's a high flying tech organization, and they just went out and closed on their second round of funding, which they were so successful with their sales strategy and their growth strategy, they were able to skip a round of funding because the revenue their CAC or their customer acquisition costs were so low compared to very few companies double in size every year, 3 years in a row. But you compare the sales cost of this company to other companies that have done that, and it's literally 50% the cost that they're running on sales and marketing to do this. And it really is because their CEO, again, who's a brilliant technologist who had never sold a day in his life, but he knew something that a lot of other CEOs didn't. That look, their salespeople are unique animals, and I want to know more about the very best on the planet than any of my competitors. And I want to design a system that ensures that if I hire someone, I have a high degree of confidence in their ability to perform. And then I want all of these things we've laid out here. How do I accelerate them? That normally, if it takes someone 12 to 24 months to start chipping away at quota, that has to be done in 6 months in my company. So I will provide any resource that I have to provide, and I will put a comprehensive business process in place to ensure we are doing everything we can to get the most out of our people and to give them the biggest opportunity. And when I talk with this CEO, this sounds so like such common sense, but common sense is so uncommonly applied. The conversation is, look, when I run engineering, there's a business process. My finance, there's a business process. Operations, we have a business process for that. Why does the world of selling not have a process? Everything about selling should be a business process. Everything about your talent strategy should be a business process. So again, he just basically the same kind of rigor that he runs engineering and operations, he insisted that he run his sales force that way. And so he put in this approach here that we have here on our board, and it is paid. Again, they've got a great technology and they're in the right place at the right time. But even with that, it's not by accident that you double in size every year for 3 years. I mean, you have to have world-class sales process and systems. And this CEO would say that this is the reason that I have and it's a constant work in process. I mean, every quarter it's being evaluated and tweaked and refined. But it's just such a powerful story. Again, sales is a process, talent is a process, and you have to put measurement-based business strategies in place to beat your competition.
Well, that was really helpful. I have a question just kind of before we all close up here. So everything that you're saying, and having worked internally, within a large organization myself, a lot of times to make these kind of grand sweeping changes, you have to do as much internal selling as you might if you were trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal externally. So what do you feel like is the best way, excuse me, the best way to get everybody on board to this new talent strategy that a company like yours could create?
No, great question. And I think it's this slide that when sales managers, chief revenue officers sit down with their CEO or their CFO, it's this question. What explains success? Here's the data. 10 to 20% of our people are outproducing 80% of our population by 5 to 10 times. Yet everyone has an opinion, but we don't know why. Like this is one of the single greatest drivers of business value in our company, and we don't have data on it. Just, and I don't recall very many conversations where I'm sitting across the table from a CEO or a CFO and have that conversation where they don't say, you're right, we need to know that. And it's just such a great place to start. Understand what is explaining success within your company. Then once you have that, all of a sudden now it's a data-driven conversation. And when you're dealing with executives and with people that have a lot on their plate and thinking about a lot of different things, being really persuasive, sure, that's helpful. Having great ideas, yeah, that's helpful. But data solves a lot of problems. And so many things that people are trying to take on in their organization from a talent or HR perspective, they're just doing it with good intentions, and with a persuasive PowerPoint presentation. They don't have data. And so I get the data, and that data then will allow you to all of a sudden start making giant inroads into the talent transformation of your organization.
I think that's a great note to kind of leave things on here. So thank you for that. If you can, Troy, shift to the very last slide, there is there's an email address there where folks can send, if they have any follow-up questions, they can go ahead and contact us at askus@millerheimangroup.com, and we'll respond to any questions there. I'm also going to be forwarding on a copy of this presentation. So for everybody who joined us today, thank you so much. And Troy, really, thank you so much for the great insight and good questions from everybody. So thanks again, folks. And if we don't have any other questions, Troy, any last words from you?
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And just to let you know that CSO Insights has just released a really, really interesting report on the state of talent in the corporate world. And I believe that's available to folks as well. So if you respond to the Ask Us at Miller Heiman Group, I think as that report is being released here kind of as we speak, you can get a copy of that.
Yep, we'll gladly send that over, definitely. All right, well, thank you. We're at the top of the hour. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening or wherever you are in the world. And Troy, again, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
All righty. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.